Hello and Happy New Year to everybody. Hope you all had a
Happy New Year, everyone.
fantastic festive season and that the hangovers are worn off now.
Oh, did you have a hangover? I didn't.
Maybe. Anyway, a nice gentle one to ease us into the new year. So what we're going to share with you this week is a lovely presentation, which was the opening session of the most recent Independence Forum for Scotland conference. And that took place on the 8th of November, I think, 2025. And this is from the Makar, Padraig MacAoidh. We both really enjoyed this session, didn't we, Marlene?
I just loved it. Just really, really loved it. It was just beautiful. Well, he is a poet, so, you know.
Yeah, you would
he's
expect
giving a talk, but it's just lovely. You're really going to enjoy this.
It's a pleasure to be here. Liz Lockhead, in her 1987 play, Mary Queen of Scots Got Her Head Chopped Off, has a narrator who is half a woman and half a crow. So it's a woman Corby figure. And the Corby starts off by asking, country, Scotland, what like is it? It's a peat bog. It's a dark forest. It's a cauldron or lie, a salt pan or a coal mine. If you're guy lucky, it's a bricht beer meadow or a park of Kye. Or maybe it's a field of stains. It's a tenement or a merchant's haw, Prince's Street or Paddy's Market. It's a fistful of fish or a pickle of oatmeal. It's a queen's banquet or roast meats and junkets. It depends. It depends. I dinna ken what your Scotland's like. Here's mine. National flower, the thistle. National pastime, nostalgia. National weather, smur, har, drizzle, snow. National bird, the crow. I dinna ken what your Scotland is like either. I dinna ken what my Scotland is like. How do you talk about what's it like to be a Scot today? I can't do that. It's impossible. I can talk about what it's like to be this Scot today. Every individual has a different experience of Scottishness or being a Scot. So this is going to be a personal talk. It's a real pleasure here because I've been talking to lots of different groups around Civic Scotland as well about culture, trying to make you listen to more poetry, sorry folks, and also trying to bring Gaelic into the room wherever possible. But it is and has to be a personal perspective for various reasons. I'm not party political, I'm not political aligned, I'm not a political campaigner, I've signed up to the Civil Servants Code, so everything I say here are thoughts about culture, and that's all. On the next slide, there is a quotation from Alistair Gray, which you will know because it's on the Scottish Parliament building twice over, because we need that. Live as if you work in the early days of a better nation. Obviously, each one of us has a different better nation in mind, and each one of those is individual as well. I grew up in the Isle of Lewis. I'm a Gaelic speaker. I went to Glasgow University. I've lived in Barcelona, Dublin, Belfast. Like many other university-educated Gaelic speakers, I've worked for the BBC, and now I work at one of the oldest of Scotland's universities, St Andrews. Is this relatable? Not really, but it doesn't have to be. And so what I'm going to do here is absolutely look at things that are not relatable, things that are my own particular version of what Scotland is or has been in the past. But to try and get over the nostalgia thing, and also to try and think about the different kinds of better nation that I would want, partly informed by literature. For me, Scotland has always been porous. Its borders are always fluid. Its borders are always open. The culture, the literature, the language has always been different things. So Colm Keeley, the Scottish and Irish language organisation, about 15 years ago created a map which tries to recreate or re-envisage how we see Scotland. And this is a map that tilts our perspectives. And it looks at how, Shetland, It's one of those maps that Shetland doesn't get on because of the differences of distance. But it's one of those maps that tries to show us how we can see the world slightly differently. And this is looking at Scotland, Ireland as a cultural continuity with similar language and place names. And this is part of the world that I grew up in, which was a cultural continuity dating back 2,000 years, in which from the south of Kerry to the tip of Lewis, where I grew up, there was a shared language, a shared understanding. Our oldest poems in Scotland are Irish as well. You can either look at the Altus Prastater, the Hiberno-Latin text, or you can look at the poem by St. Columba when he is coming over to Scotland. Feel soul and glass, tick be air in the hish, knock na netche torm ta fer air in nachm na. How good is your 8th century Irish? Mine's not great, but the English is more or less, a grey eye looks back upon Ireland, but no more shall see her skies, her men or her women. So you could look at this as the culture that I grew up in, Gaelic Scotland, one that is always looking back, but also looking forward. There's always a process of travelling. And growing up bilingual, it meant that I had access to different languages or different cultures or codes. When I waited for the bus to go into Stornoway on a Friday night at the bus shelter, I would sing Runrig, yes, but I'd also sing the Pogues, or I'd sing U2, and that was part of my heritage. This is my version of code switching between Gaelic and English. But everybody, I think, in Scotland can code switch in different ways. We all have more than one language, whether that's versions of English or versions of English and Scots. And so one of the things we can all do is speak doubly or triply, and that's really interesting. It's flexible and fluid. It's a strength. But it also leads you into strange places. When I was working for Trinity College Dublin, they would send me into the Gaels Colony, the Irish language schools in Dublin, to teach them Scottish Gaelic. To go, my God, this is an international language. We have cousins over there. And then they'd ask me the inevitable question whenever they meet anybody from Scotland, what football team do you support? And I'd go, Aberdeen, thank you very much. And they'd go, Aberdeen? Do they have a football team? And then I'd say, well, yes, but what do you expect me to say? Well, surely you support Celtic. And I would say, I grew up on the Isle of Lewis. This is where the Reverend Ian Paisley went on holiday. Which he did. He was a good friend of Angus Smith. But that's only part of the story, because growing up in Lewis, there was the Free Church of Scotland, the Church of Scotland, the Free Presbyterian Church of Scotland, later the Free Church continuing, but there were also Catholics, the Baha'i faith, Sikh, Hindus, Muslims. It was a really interesting religious mix underneath the stereotype. And it's always been that way. The next map is courtesy of Google, because this is one that I've used before when talking in Athens. I come from an island. The sea, if I wasn't so terrified of it, would be my friend. It would be the route that connects us all. In 1800 BC, there was a hoard deposited in Adabrock in the north end of Lewis, which had swords, rings, beads that had been gathered all over Europe. This was a trader who had left them there. On 1000 AD, at the Old Manastor on the Isle of Skye, there were dirhams from North Africa found there. We have all of our history being connected by the sea to North Europe and to the Mediterranean. Everything has been in flow or flux. If you believe the medieval versions of Scottishness, Scota was the daughter of an Egyptian pharaoh. Or the Gaels came from Greece, or the Gaels came from Scythia. There has always been desires to find origin in different places because we move. And so growing up in Lewis in the 1980s and 90s was not just an island existence. I don't know if you can all remember this. The rush at The bells on Hogmanay. Okay, yeah, the bells are going, you have the whiskey, you hug everybody there, and then you run to the phone. And you desperately try and phone people all over the country because we're dispersed before the local exchange gets blocked. Because you know that there's going to be 10 or 15 minutes where you can't get through. Or even if you're very lucky, you get through and you can listen in on another conversation that's happening at the same time. And if you come from a small village, you want that level of gossip. But at New Year, you would be phoning the uncle in Auckland, the cousins in the United States, the cousins in Canada. There was always this connection internationally as well. Sailors in the village had stories from South America, from the Panama and Suez Canals, from Singapore. Others had worked in different kinds of service all around the world. And this was not, in the 80s and 90s, a white society. There had been decades of immigration into Lewis as well, from subcontinental Asia, from North America, Italy, Africa. And so it was a really rich cultural space, but it has been for thousands of years. And then, of course, we were one of the poorest regions in Europe. So we had Band 1 European Union funding, which meant I had pen friends in Brittany. I had school trips to Holland and to Belgium. The EU was very palpable in the Western Isles in the 80s and 90s because they were very good at filling in the gaps, especially from the Westminster government in terms of infrastructure. There are reasons that it was such a clear vote in favour of staying in the EU up there. What does this mean? This means that when I look at Scotland, I kind of look at myself at that very far western point there. And if I ever leave Lewis, why stop in Ullapool? Why stop in Inverness? Why stop in Glasgow or Edinburgh? Why stop on this island? You may as well travel as far as possible. And I think this is an absolute island mentality all across Scotland as well. And so, in ways that resonate with growing up in Lewis, I found myself for 2 summers digging in an archaeological dig in Crete, where we were desperately trying to find Minoan civilization, but kept finding younger stuff, not as valuable. But probably the most important thing we found were a collection of bones, probably different 80 individuals thrown all together, because they had been buried somewhere else, and then because of a catastrophe, they took their dead with them when they moved to Crete, and they reburied them. This is something we do. We take our dead with us in different ways, and we have to know how to deal with that, how to live with that. Well, that was morbid. Where now? I grew up in a village of 200 people, and the next picture is an aerial shot of that village. If you know it, it is Shadler Barbs on the west coast of Lewis. 200 people in a linear settlement stretched out along 3 or 4 roads. When I was growing up, there were 3 shops in the village. Now there are none. When I was growing up, there were about 4 or 5 different vans that travelled through the village that would sell meat, fish, the dentist's van, which was always a treat, the library van, which was more of a treat. And when I was growing up, it was a village that was largely based on agriculture and fishing. So we were crofters, we were fisher folk. I remember the looms in the village with the weavers making Harris tweed. I remember the big bags of wool beside the road to take them away to the mills. Most of that has gone. But let's not be nostalgic about that. The village that you see behind me is less than 100 years old, because one of the stories of the Western Isles is constant movement. The village used to be on the shore because it was a village of black houses. In the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, everybody moved inland to new white houses, sanitary places, with more land and more opportunity. The weirdest thing about this is that they kept the old house numbers where they went. And so if you travel through the village, you will have number 33 beside number 15. You'll have 22 beside 6. You need to have not a map of the village as it is now, if you're a postman, but a map of the village that no longer exists, that was down there somewhere. And so you're carrying with you 2 different time periods at the same time. 200 people. When I was growing up there, probably about 80% of them would be Gaelic speakers. Now it'll be below 50%. And so, although we have in the last census seen an uptick in the number of Gaelic speakers, that's largely because of increases in the cities, in Glasgow and in Edinburgh especially, but also places like Aberdeenshire. Gaelic as a living language or as a community language is at serious risk. Now, why has this happened? Lots of different factors. The internet, education, people buying houses, people moving, the usual factors. But there has been a major shift in my lifetime. Nostalgia itself speeds up. You maybe need to slow down a little bit. This is the last of my pictures. And this is just out the road from my mother's house on top of a hill. I have no idea what this is. Nobody has any idea what this is, but we know that it is old. It is a couple of thousand years old. In my lifetime, it has been known as a settlement, a steading, a chambered cairn, an enclosure. All we know is that there is a trace of a civilization that we don't fully understand underneath our feet, that we have a mystery that we are living in and beside. If you write poetry, God, this is good for your imagination. If you're an archaeologist, I think this is dreadful, it's terrible. But it means that you have this sense of living in a world where there are things we don't fully understand, and that's fine. Histories and time shifts that go beyond anything that we have in our culture. Kind of makes you feel a little bit better when you see everything changing before your eyes as quickly as it is. You might have noticed I haven't really mentioned Scotland there in the last 10 minutes. That's because Scotland was a slightly amorphous entity for me growing up. There were trips to Glasgow, to Edinburgh, Inverness, Cumbernauld, Salin and Fife. But there were more often trips to Skye or Harris. I knew of the Loch Ness Monster, but had not seen it. I supported Aberdeen Football Club, but had not seen them play. The institutions of Scotland were not as visible to me, unsurprisingly, as those of the United Kingdom. I grew up with very narrow versions of history. All I can remember, and I teach Scottish literature. I have no qualifications in Scottish literature from my schooling. The only history I remember from school is the Vikings and the World War II. I'm not entirely sure what happens in between them. Or if this is the same phenomenon occurring again and again and again. It's quite hard to tell. The comics that we read were Commando, Roy of the Rovers. The films that we watched had very interesting overseas adventures like Zulu, Carry On Up the Khyber, Chariots of Fire, where different aspects of a British identity would combine together. If you close your eyes and think of the Scottish Parliament building, I've no idea what's in your head. I don't know which part of it you will be thinking of or looking at, whether it's the front door, whether it's the woodwork, whether it's the wall I had behind you there. If you close your eyes and think of Westminster, I know exactly what you're thinking of, because it was on the HP sauce bottles. And it is this iconic image that we know. And it's very hard to tell the stories of any nation or any place if you don't have the shared imagery, if you don't have the shared icons or tales. Would I recognize a depiction of the Clyde without any names there? Would I recognize the Thames? Yes, because I watched EastEnders growing up. So every single night you see these images and they tell you, they give you a shape of who you are. I'm not the first to say this. So Alistair Gray, in his famous Glasgow novel Lanark, talks about this in one of the most quoted pieces of Scottish literature of the last 50 years. And this is the next slide. Think of Florence, Paris, London, New York. Nobody visiting them for the first time is a stranger because he's already visited them in paintings, novels, history books, and films. But if a city hasn't been used by an artist, not even the inhabitants live there imaginatively. What is Glasgow to most of us? A house, the place we work, a football park or golf course, some pubs and connecting streets. That's all. Nah, I'm wrong. There's also the cinema and library, and when our imagination needs exercise, we use these to visit London, Paris, Rome under the Caesars, the American West at the turn of the century, anywhere but here and now. Imaginatively, Glasgow exists as a music hall song. You know the song? And a few bad novels. That's all we've given to the world outside. It's all we've given to ourselves. Things have changed. This was 1981. And I think things are a little bit better now, at least. Our institutions are more visible. We have a parliament building that we can at least each have our own different version of. We have, if you're a Gaelic speaker anyway, TV stations and radio stations that you can identify closely with. I lived in Spain, the Republic of Ireland, and Northern Ireland for much of the 2000s. And when I came back, the difference in Scotland was entirely noticeable to me. Much had changed in that 10 years. This was much closer to a comparably sized European country in its discussions and mockery of itself on a political and social level, its squabbles and scandals, its noble speeches and its ignoble booing, its literary awards, and of course dismissal of anybody who wins a literary award for getting too big for their own boots. Or maybe I was more mature and more able to see it. So where does that leave us? This is where I have come from. This is my version of Scotland up to now. About 5 years ago, I was asked to write a piece by Val McDermid for a collection of books, stories that she was gathering called Imagine a Country, to try and get as many different versions of a possible Scotland, whatever your political stripe, as possible. I'm going to read that, then I'm going to read a poem, and then I'm going to let you tear me to pieces if you want. So this is Imagine a Country. I have always felt buoyed by the sight of lights across water, looking across from Slate to Malig, say, with house lights studding the dark bulk of the mainland and streaking across Kyles. There's a sense of community at a distance there, and with that, a sense of reassurance. Growing up on the west coast of Lewis, there was no such permanence, though there would be, looking out onto the ocean, the passing dots of ships taking the main sea route, the largest of those lit up and spread out like a floating township. Our own villages, meanwhile, are austere strings of Christmas lights draping the coastline, not too near the edge of the island for fear of dropping off. There is vertigo to living in so much darkness, to the heaving mass of an invisible ocean. What does it mean to imagine a country? Is it the same as imagining a community, or imagining what it means to belong deeply, frivolously, superficially, skeptically, transitorily in or to a place? What of this country? Any country, any Scotland, I imagine, would have to incorporate the Western Isles, where I grew up, and Edinburgh, where I now live. And the emotional and physical connections between those two places seem tenuous. The lights twinkle dimly across those Kyles. For Gaelic speakers like myself, Edinburgh has often felt, despite the ongoing attempt to develop a Gaelic centre and a dedicated Gaelic secondary school in the city, Edinburgh has felt like a distant irrelevance. For centuries, if Edinburgh existed in the Gaelic imagination at all, it existed as Calton Prison, somewhere that was a threat. Or it was the risk of having your wallet tricked from you on the high street, or of meeting your end at the hands of the common executioner. How easy do we feel about having a military garrison at the centre of a capital city? But the problem is not just Edinburgh. For most of my childhood, any town or city, Stornoway, Portree, Inverness, Glasgow, felt like an unreality, a not entirely welcome necessity, a historic mistake. I didn't even mention Fort William there. I'm on good form today. One of the great things about the Highlands as a space is the lack of a definite centre or a clear hierarchy. We have no respect for clan chiefs anymore. And though in my childhood there was a castle looming over Stornoway, by then it was no longer the moke baronial 19th century drug-hazed dream that it was in the original, but a somewhat run-down college, shabby and apologetic for its past. I can't imagine, in other words, the contemporary Highlands, or by extension Scotland, through the traditional image of the oak tree, one continuous organism in which we are all sheltered by the canopy of London, Edinburgh, Inverness, aristocracy, whatever it's going to be. Instead, the Highlands are for me a forest, dotted with lots of different points of power and location. A way that is erratic or unruly, or indeed creative. This might just be another fantasy version of a country, one in which the eccentric, the small, the marginalised can find their own place, can be their own centre. But that's the kind of country I would imagine, one that has rejected the open market, the visionary who would happily buy the land and bend it to their will, and shape the idea of community as they see fit. So, the country I would see is one in which the glinting lights of community exist all year round, where caps are not doffed, where fuel poverty is not endemic in some of the most renewable energy-rich parts, where there is a basic income for artists on the model of the Republic of Ireland, so there can be more artistic experiment, play, creation. Hell, actually no, where there's a universal basic income for everybody, so that happens and everybody becomes an artist. Where LGBTQ plus rights are enshrined and fully respected, where Gaelic speakers, especially in the Highlands and Islands, have affordable housing, jobs and the possibility of making a full living in their communities, where clean and affordable travel between all parts of the country is possible, where epenthetic and Svaravakti vowels are loved and cherished, where every village, each community has a cracking festival celebrating the oddest, weirdest and most localized thing you can imagine, the choice of that community, and which they hold first and foremost for themselves, and I, tourists, are welcome too. The Festival of Bog Cotton, great. The Lewis Kabaddi Festival, sign me up. I wrote that 3 years ago. I stand by more or less all of it, still. If I was writing it now, I'd probably have to be a bit more ambitious. I would say, I imagine a country where libraries don't get burned, where the word's gone. Let's not talk about contemporary politics, globally. And this has left me now in a slightly odd position, because I am the first Gaelic speaking Makar. I get to speak in rooms like this where if I switched into Gaelic, I think 3 or 4 of you at most might be able to follow what I speak, because I've got a particular west side of Lewis tinge to my accent, where I try and encourage people to think creatively as much as possible, but also to celebrate that multilingual, diverse, porous culture. So one of the things I'm doing as Makar is trying to get people to write poems in as many languages as possible. If you know anybody in secondary school, there's a great initiative called Mother Tongue, Other Tongue, where you have to write poems in any language but English. And so that's based out of Strathclyde University. I can strongly recommend it. I'm going to finish just with one thing, which is a poem that I was asked to write by Stirling University. I come from Lewis, so obviously they wanted me to write a poem for an orchard. There are no orchards in Lewis. There are no trees that stand upright. The trees, you can't have apple trees that are fruitful at that angle. So I had to go away and do a lot of research, and it's for the Pathfoot building at Stirling University. And one of the lovely things about that village is that it used to be a community of farmers, of millers, and also of cordoners. Do we know what cordoners are? Okay, cordoners is a great old Scots word. It means shoemaker. But it also means from Cordoba in Spain, because that's where they got their leather. So there's this really great Scots word which is talking about international trade, and also international trade and then making it into something new. I'm going to read this poem here. It's not on the slides at all. Bun na Slia. Seo in áte faran de háisich an dúich, blár, clach chéinechan, áte sí, san nuair sin ardrád, frírád, drochuirte chéal tua go jes, bíad túchaníchan seo, ag áteach, a fás agus a mélich agus gríasichan, cordoners, bha jalanta le bíon go hín gur cep go oprachig mar gan bé lihir finad Cordoba bhaun. Áte siúl taló síl mhór, na churas dúniu ver mílsin fataú, héide bháin, blian and joy blian and joy blian. Pathfoot. This is one place the country began. Battlefield, memorial stone, place of peace, and then high road, by road, bridge connecting wild north to wild south. They were farmers here, cultivating, growing, milling, and shoemakers, cordoners, skilled with hide, working it on the last, gently handling it as if it was the finest leather from Cordoba. A place of flow, a place of plenty. What you sow today will take you many long miles, might be reaped year upon year upon year. Moran taing gaif ule. Thank you all very much for listening.
Oh, hope you enjoyed that as much as we did. Just lyrical, absolutely lovely to listen to, wasn't it? This was a full day event that Independence Forum for Scotland put on. It was live streamed and it is available on YouTube. If you want to watch the whole event, you can do. And we'll put the link in the notes so you can find it. Thanks for listening, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that. Don't forget to subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're listening on YouTube, you can click the little bell and you get a reminder whenever we put out a new episode, which is every Friday.
And sign up for our mailing list. You can do that from the website. And we always send one out at the beginning of each month to tell you what's happening. Last but not least, you can buy us a coffee on coffee.com.
And we'll catch you later. Bye now.